Thank you for listening to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast, available on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Stitcher. Also, please follow Matt's Movie Reviews on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Reddit, Instagram, and MeWe. And of course, be sure to visit mattsmoviereviews.net for the latest reviews, top 10 lists, and more. Now, on to the show.
People who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
Osama bin Laden claiming credit for the 9/11 attacks.
The biggest and most costly manhunt in U.S. history is building to a crescendo.
The United States killed Osama bin Laden.
Sources say an elite division of the Navy SEALs carried out the operation.
There are reports surfacing that Al-Qaeda has placed a $50,000 US bounty on the heads of any US Navy SEALs, dead or alive.
Dude, I think they just got shot.
Nobody's going to survive that. There's nobody in that.
This is the single largest loss of life in Afghanistan in a single incident.
Most of them are U.S. Navy SEALs.
My job was to protect, and that night, I wasn't able to do that.
This flight should have been 10 minutes from wheels up to wheels down, but we lost communication with it. We've had 2 U.S. Army pilots verified that a black box was installed on Extortion 17.
One of the more sensational stories is that the black box was washed away in a flash flood. Was there a black box?
No, sir.
So without a doubt, that black box was installed.
We discovered bullets in the bodies of the Navy SEALs. The military threw them away.
More likely than not, that supports a shootout on board.
Some of the families were told that the bodies were not identifiable. That is absolutely not the case.
And in fact, their sons were cremated.
I called the command. I said, why'd you cremate my son? My son didn't want to be cremated.
Every American should be taught about what happened in Extortion 17.
The families want to know the why. We owe that to them.
The tragedy is the caliber of men that were lost.
What we do know is that it is clear that someone wanted the truth out.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 367. Available on digital exclusively to Salem now is Fallen Angel, Extortion 17, a documentary that explores the events surrounding the 2011 crash of Extortion 17 that resulted in deaths of 30 servicemen while on a mission in Afghanistan. An uncompromising examination into the facts, the lies, and the aftermath that this tragic event had upon the lives of many. Fallen Angel, Extortion 17 also proves to be an incredibly relevant film as the war in Afghanistan comes to a close. And now joining me now is the co-director and writer of Extortion 17, Mr. Stephen Spivey. Stephen, I thank you so very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Matt. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for the time.
It's really interesting. So I did as much research as I could in regards to you and this film. It's, when you were approached to take on this film some time ago, you initially turned it down. Was it the fact that the heavy subject matter of this movie, is that something that really kind of like weighed on you? And is that why at first you were like, you didn't want to approach it?
That is absolutely one reason. We just come off making a film about street kids in Mexico City. And as you can imagine, that's a very hard and difficult topic to negotiate when you're filming. And so when we came off that, I really didn't want to jump back into something that was that difficult. And so some people reached out to me and they asked if I would consider it. And as you said, I said, no, not at this time. And about a year later, they came back to me and they said, hey, would you consider it? Just read the book and see what you think. And so I read the book and I was touched. And really what drew me to the project, besides all the craziness that took place and things that happened that seemed really wrong, besides that, it was the parents that I saw on TV. It was Billy and Karen Vaughn, and it was their resolve of, after their son had passed, how they behaved. And I saw a family that was not just surviving the death of their son. Thriving may be the wrong word, but they were doing some pretty extraordinary things. And what I saw there was, if this family can get through it, there's something that helps them along the way. And I want to share that with people.
Was that the Vaughn family that you're referring to?
It was Billy and Karen Vaughn.
I think in the film, someone referred to them as mourning with hope. I think it's interesting. I never heard that before. I think something like that is really quite inspirational, I think, especially for Gold Star families who will watch this film, that clearly there is a tragedy, clearly there is grief, but there is also a way to move forward and honor the fallen, honor the people in your family who have died in service. And I guess one of those ways is what the Vaughn family are doing, because they were very essential in having not only the book by Don Brown go out there, but also getting this movie forward, weren't they?
They were. Something that struck a chord with me, personally, I'm a Christian. And so when I was listening to their story, I kept hearing about their faith. And it was really powerful. And when I would listen to them, there was something different. And so if you look at their books, you can see it. Karen, her book on her son was fantastic. And she just talked about how special a person he was, and how his faith in God got him through a lot of really tough times. And so she explains that, and that, the way she describes that at every point and every opportunity that she gets really, I think, gives people hope. And so I've heard many testimonials of people talking about exactly that. They were going through a difficult time. They saw Karen Vaughn on an interview talking about her hope, and it really helped them along. So it was a pleasure interviewing her.
Myself as a film critic and film journalist, and yourself as a filmmaker, I'm sure we both agree that films are important. And I think the reason why films are so important is that a lot of the times they bring forth stories that people have forgotten over time. This story, I think a lot of people forgot about. And it's easy to see why there's such a fast news cycle happening, even back in 2011. Really, that's really when the time that really what we see now, the origins of how we see news now really started at that time. And so many things, so many news stories have come out of Afghanistan and different places as well. And I think people have forgotten about Extortion 17. You yourself, I'm sure you as a serviceman knew about it, but was there things about this story that came forth during your research and you're talking to the soldiers and that you had no idea about, that you thought was essential that people didn't know?
Yeah, we did several things. And just to speak quickly on how quickly people forget about the fallen, I'm old enough to remember when MTV came out, and they would move very quickly because they realized that young people's attention spans were not that long. So they moved in 30-second increments, and really it was a brilliant move on their part. But that's kind of what all of the media, especially in the United States, if not the world, has found, that move quick and move often, and you will captivate people and get them to tune into you. So some of the things that that we learned, and really this is the biggest thing, is when we ask these young men and women to go to war that are starting at 18, sometimes as young as 17, and ask them to go to war, it's a huge thing. It's a huge ask. And so we send these people over, and they go and they fight for their nation and a cause, and it's so difficult. And so you see a lot of these people coming back, and they're suffering with post-traumatic stress, and it really eats at them. But when I talk to these people, they're speaking of resolve. They are so committed to their country, in this case, the United States. It's really inspiring, and it really, to me, it goes back to, like yesteryear, when people really believed in their country, and so when I interviewed these people, I was just moved beyond words. And there's a lot of things that we couldn't use in the film that they would talk about, and they were moved to tears, talking about losing their friends. But yet they still remain the same in the belief in their country and the cause. And it was really inspiring.
The movie has asked so many questions. Some of these questions people might have heard of already regarding, was there a black box on board the helicopter? A lot of different questions. The thing that really struck me, though, that really left an impression on me afterwards, was the philosophical nature of war, especially in regards to rules of engagement versus law of war. For people who don't know the difference, because I didn't know there was even a difference between the two. I always imagined that rules of engagement was just what you were and were not allowed to do. But law of war, is that something that leaves kind of like a grey line in there? So in case something does happen that falls outside the precipice of rules of engagement, people can, or soldiers can, work upon instinct. I mean, how does that all work, and especially in regards to what happened that night in 2011?
Well, the law of war is static. And so it doesn't move. It's not changed. It's something that nations came together in the Geneva Convention and worked through to make sure that we would do war in a way that we're not going to be abusing POWs, and we're not going to be doing things that are against humanity, those type of things. Of course, you can argue that war is against humanity, but so that's the law of war, essentially. Rules of engagement is very interesting because, as you said, most people think rules of engagement, that's just something that the military does. It's just rules of engagement. That's the way it operates, but that's not what it is. Rules of engagement is when administrations put their influence on what's going on in the war, in battle, and it's very it's pretty horrendous. And as a former serviceman, I really didn't even understand how deep it was. But so in the rules of engagement, you have an administration that decides that they want to achieve a certain goal. And this last administration, and just one quick thing, when we did the film, I was not trying to do a political film. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter what administration was in there, because whether in the States, whether the Republicans or the Democrats are in office, oftentimes everyone messes up on the rules of engagement. And so that's not what we tried to do here. I really tried to be balanced, but I wanted to point things out. Yes. But in the rules of engagement, you have an administration in this case that, and we heard this often, that we want to win their hearts and minds. It's hard for me, being 53 years old now. When I think about winning hearts and minds, I think of that and I think, well, that is something that we should do. We should try to do something like that. But then if we've committed to go to war, then we have to go to war. And going to war should mean that we go to war to win. And so in this case, when we try to go over and win hearts and minds, things often get convoluted. So we would have JAG officers, attorneys essentially, that were assigned to brigades. And these are infantry brigades. And these brigades were at war in constant battle doing missions. And so they would get the rules of engagement would be passed down, and they would have to go through it with their attorney to make sure they understood everything. And then on top of that, when they're planning, the attorney would essentially come in and either say yay or nay and try to influence them. Of course, you have certain colonels and generals that would ignore that, but that's the rules of engagement. That is administrations, people that don't fight battles, trying to dictate the way the battle will go. And what happens, people will get killed. And we saw that many times, green on blue, and then just some horrendous things. And I could tell you lots of stories.
Something that really struck me, and I think the events of the last couple of weeks have especially brought forth a lot of parallels and narratives that have come out from this incident and this documentary. One of them that really kind of struck me was and I'm going to go in this light because I don't want to say anything bad about the Afghans who were served alongside with the Americans in Afghanistan. Many lives have been lost there, but there is something to really come out in regards to the inadequacies of the Afghan army. And we just saw a whole army that the US military have trained for over 20 years cut and run, essentially, as soon as the US decided to withdraw. And now when you watch this film, and there's these reports that supposedly maybe there could have been inside information fed to the Taliban from people within working alongside with US soldiers. And maybe I shouldn't be surprised, because I think there was like 12 reported murders of Afghan allies killing US troops, even like some really cowardly or like horrific attacks. When you watch the things that is happening now, and then you look back on the stories and look back on the different types of theories that come in from what happened that night in 2011, we've seen sometimes a little more of a clearer picture of some things that might have been a bit murky 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it's when you say 20 years, I think, gosh, that's ancient history. Well, really, it's not. That's when we started the war in Afghanistan.
Exactly. Yes.
So it's it's such a difficult thing.
Yeah.
We knew what we wanted to get out of this when we went to war. We wanted to go in and we wanted to take out Osama bin Laden, and we wanted to squash terrorism in that region. And then on top of that, we wanted to start to nation build, maybe develop a nation that was a capitalist nation and could do voting and those type of things. Great things to try to achieve. But, there's in that region of the world for thousands of years, they've been going to war and going to war with each other in the same country. And so they truly believe that their way is right. And they and a lot of those fundamentalists just don't want to hear about another nation involved.
Yeah.
So they use a lot of tactics. In the movie, they talk about, one of those APUs, Afghan partners. He talks about how they would threaten his family, and do those, those horrible things to him to get him to switch over to the other side. And so he may or may not have been one of the ones that switched over, but oftentimes it happened. And so we could not pinpoint specifically to this event that there was somebody on there, but it is highly likely. And so, when we go over there and we do this, and again, this ties back into the rules of engagement, we have to go over there and do it right. My personal opinion is that, war is not to be extended. There should never be a 20-year war. I think that personally, I think that's ridiculous. I think that if we go in to achieve a goal, in this case, to stomp out terrorism in the region and take out Osama bin Laden, if we're going to do that, let's do that. And then let's leave. Because what a lot of people think is that, we can go in there and we can fight, and then we can leave and it's not going to happen again. That's not the case. It will happen again. It could even be more difficult, but we can't let that bother us, because, as a nation, we should be protecting ourselves, in my opinion. So if we decide that we want to have a presence there, then let's make sure that we do the job right. Let's go in over there and let's train their military the right way. Let's give a good timetable for us to pull out. And then if we want to nation build, let's leave bases over there, or forts.
Yeah.
That way we can kind of keep an eye on things. But, in this case, personally, I highly disagree with the way we just did things over there. I think it's pretty atrocious. And
that's, I think, we could go on about that for hours and hours. So that's a documentary within its own, my friend. I think that might be a future project to look into, because there's so much there, still evolving to this day. The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by 80s Tees. 80s Tees is an online retailer of licensed t-shirts and pop culture gear from your favorite movies, TV shows, cartoons, video games, comic books, and musicians. Celebrate your inner 80s nerd and click on the link in the show notes below to get the raddest retro t-shirts delivered to your door. The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Loot Crate. Founded in 2012, Loot Crate is the worldwide leader in fan subscription boxes. Loot Crate partners with industry leaders in entertainment, gaming, sports, and pop culture to deliver monthly themed crates, produce interactive experiences in digital content, and film original video productions. No matter what you geek out about, Loot Crate has a subscription box for you. To get your very own exclusive collectibles, apparel, and gear delivered to your door, be sure to click on the link in the show notes below. The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is also brought to you by Vudu. Watch the latest movies and TV shows anytime, anywhere. No subscriptions, no contract. Enjoy stunning quality in up to 4K ultra high definition at home and download and watch on your mobile device as well. To rent and buy from over 100,000 titles or watch thousands of movies free with Vudu Movies on us, be sure to click on the link in the show notes below. Now, back to the show. I wanted to talk about the filmmaking of Extortion 17, especially in regards to recreations. I mean, you got great archival footage in here, and that's something I'm going to talk about as well. But of course, you can't, you can't always you weren't there at the time. You couldn't film what was happening. You had to recreate a lot of what was happening. The recreations look fantastic in this movie. They really do. How did you approach doing recreations in this film? Did you use miniatures? Did you use special effects? How did you kind of do it, especially with what I imagine will be limited funds, considering it's an independent project?
Right. Independent project, documentary. It doesn't usually equal up to a large budget. We were fortunate because our budget was big enough. So what we did, Matt, is we wanted to make sure that it was authentic. And yes. So my former CO in the military was actually Colonel Robert Chapa, who was in the documentary. And so I went to him and I just asked, I said, hey, we need this to be real. Could you help us? Colonel Chapa was the chief of the infantry in the Army, and his contacts are vast. He himself is highly regarded. More so than that, he's a superhero in the Army. And so he made some calls, and we were fortunate to get a lot of the former Rangers to come and participate. And so we didn't have to train anybody up. They already knew the movements. They knew the story. A lot of the guys that we had doing the recreations were actually over there at that time. And so that was just a huge blessing for us to have those guys. And just, you know how nights can go, Matt. I mean, we were filming sometimes until 2:30, 3:30 at night. And these guys who are highly trained did not squirm. They didn't balk. They just knew that they needed to get the job done because they wanted to honor those men. And I just can't say enough about them. So we had those guys doing the recreations. And then we did some 3D modeling, very little. And then we also, we just had some VFX guys that were, talking about sacrifice. These guys were on the project because they believed in the project, and they just gave their time and effort. And I do believe it came out really nice.
How about obtaining archival footage, like the stuff from the helicopter itself, where we actually see? I mean, I've talked to documentary filmmakers, and there's a process getting this kind of stuff. But you're talking now about using. I mean, do you have to get in touch with someone in the military? Do you have to put forward what your proposal is? Is there a long waiting time? If I was a filmmaker wanting to make a film kind of something that you were making, how does that kind of go about? How do you go about getting that kind of footage?
Yeah, the first thing is that we hire somebody that's an archivalist. That's their job, is to dig that up. So they dig it up, and then at the same time they're making notes, and then we go about the job. There's hundreds of those in there. So they go and they basically go and contact and get permission and pull things up. Some things that are newsworthy. We can go in and we can make note of it because it falls in with the time, so we can use that. But usually, really, it's the archivist that goes in and just makes tons of notes, pulls all that information up, and then the second thing is we make sure we have a really good attorney, and to make sure that, and then they go over it with a fine-tooth comb. And that takes a long time. And so the attorneys go through and make sure everything's right. And once they give the stamp of approval, then we move ahead.
How long was post-production on this? Because I imagine it would have been something to kind of piece everything kind of together and make it like the 90 minutes that I saw not long ago.
We were kind of fortunate in that area. Being independent, we have some flexibility there. And really, this is of the divine nature. We basically thought that we did all the interviews, we thought, and we were in post-production. And then we had some very important people pop up after they heard what we were doing, say, hey, we would like to interview. And it really changed the documentary. And, Sean Hannity, came forward and he was one of those guys that came in afterwards as well and said that he'd like to, participate in this. And, so I in my mind, I had a picture of who he was and, he was something totally different, just so pro-military, loves the veterans, loves the military, wanted to do, just give his time, just a super nice guy in that regard. And so that was a huge blessing as well.
You spoke to soldiers, servicemen and women who were there that night. This is clearly still has such an everlasting effect upon them, also effect upon the Gold Star families as well. When it comes to speaking to those soldiers, men and women who were there that night, I think it's really important that people realize that PTSD and suicide among veterans is such a prevalent and pressing issue. Here in Australia, actually, there's going to be a Royal Commission into veteran suicide, and something that people have been pushing for a very long time. And the numbers are staggering from the US about how many people will take their lives. When you speak to these people and they're finally able to talk about what happened that night, and how important is it, A, do you think it is for them to talk to someone about this and put it on record? And B, how important is it just to talk in general? You yourself are a Christian, so as am I. And when it comes to, subjects like this, the important thing that a lot of people say is that we need to talk, we need to communicate, people need to come forward with their feelings, because that's a first step forward to recovery.
Completely. So, so the first word that I think of is wrenching. So when I'm interviewing these soldiers and I see, and it gets me emotional thinking about it, but when I see these guys that have gone through so much and their families have gone through so much, and these are the ones that make it home, and they're talking about it. And as I'm interviewing Nick Moore and Joni Marquez, I'm looking, we're looking eye to eye, and I see Nick, going back to that time, and I know it's difficult, but I also know that we need to talk about it, and for two reasons. One being that this is very important, we need to talk about this, and two, I think it's just good to talk to people. And Nick Moore makes that point in the film, and he credits his wife about pushing him to talk. And so just for any veterans, Australian or United States or wherever they may be, I encourage anybody that hears this, we as men especially like to keep things in, because that's just what we do. And so in this case, that's absolutely the wrong thing to do. So if you are keeping this in and you're not talking about it, and you've been in a combat situation and have seen tough things, that whether you believe they're tough or not, and whether you believe that you should talk about them or not, talk to someone. Get it out there and speak to somebody. So when I would talk to these guys, I would be very sensitive to what they're going through. And with Nick, you can see it in the film. You can see Nick's eyes. There are times that, he wells up because he's reliving that moment of guys that he cared for that passed. And so I would take breaks, and I would, and this really is just, this tells you all about Nick Moore, who's just a phenomenal guy. I would say, hey, Nick, you want to take a break? And he goes, no, let's keep going. And so he'd take a sip of water and he would just keep going. And we sat there for hours talking about this. Just a super, super good guy.
Absolutely heart-wrenching stuff watching them talk about this. But like we just said, it's so important that people do talk, because communication is key. It's key to be open and let that stuff out, because if you just keep it inside you, it's just going to swallow you whole. I think over the last 2-3 years, I just myself talking personally, so many things that I believed and so many things that I had opinions that have changed so much. I imagine for yourself working on a project like this, on top of all the things that have been going on, especially of late, would have had such an impact on you. Would it be fair to say that Stephen Spivey, prior to working on Fallen Angel, has changed somewhat compared to the Stephen Spivey now that I'm talking to?
100%. Really, it honestly, it's done two things. It's made me more compassionate, because I see the travesty that took place. I see that there's an obvious cover-up here. To what extent, I don't know. And I see these people that have gone through this. I see the courage that Joni Marquez had to come forward and say, hey, we requested to engage these people. If we could have engaged these people, this would not have happened. And she lived with that for a number of years. And so I become more passionate, and then I've become more resolute. Like I try to take on projects that are important and that need to be talked about. And so after going through this and talking with families, talking with friends of the fallen, loved ones of the fallen, seeing what they've gone through, I want to see, honestly, I want to see a reinvestigation. And because there's things that were missed, there are protocols that were not implemented. And so I want to see that. And not, it's not for me. It's for the families. It's for our servicemen and women that are serving now. It's for our military, and it's for the people of the United States. Because the best thing that we can do if there was a wrong is to talk about it, to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So yeah, those would be the two things that happened that have changed me personally.
So for everyone out there listening, Fallen Angel, call sign Extortion 17, available now at Salem Now. You can go to salemnow.com. It's the first film you're going to see there. I highly recommend people really watch this movie. I mean, it's number one, it's an important story. Number two, Stephen, it's such a well-made film as well. 90 minutes. The tension doesn't let up throughout the whole 90 minutes. I mean, it's this a movie. There's a movie. A word I like to use in my reviews are stakes. What are the stakes in the story? And this is a true story. And the stakes, I think, even though this has been 20 years ago, the stakes have never been higher than they are now. That the truth in regards to this story come out. And I have a feeling that as this war of Afghanistan has now ended, that a lot of people are going to look back at a lot of things that happened there. And this one should be a priority because of the tragedy that's befallen servicemen and women in regards to it. So I just want to say, Stephen, thank you so very much for your time today. Thank you for your service, and thank you for this film, because it's really a film that a lot of people need to watch.
Matt, it's been a real pleasure, and I'm so thankful for the time. God bless.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content. Also, if you would like to request a review and support my work, please join my Patreon via the link in the description below.